Hey guys, tonight we slip beneath the moss-covered canopy of the Yucatan jungle, where time drips slowly from the leaves, and ancient stones whisper stories into the humid dark. Bats flicker overhead like forgotten punctuation marks. The ground beneath your sandals is soft, but deceptive. It's padded with centuries of secrets and buried obsidian knives. Fireflies glow in quiet constellations of their own, as if they're trying to remind you, look up, always look up. Because that's exactly what the Maya did. You step carefully, brushing aside a low-hanging vine as you enter the clearing. Scent of damp limestone and crushed copal fills the air. In the center of this clearing sits a stepped pyramid, like a staircase for the gods, frozen mid-thought. Atop it, a figure crouches beside a shallow bowl of polished water, its surface gleaming with a reflection of the night sky above. That's not for decoration. It's an observatory, a mirror to the heavens. And that figure hooded in a feathered shawl, face painted with red ochre and black charcoalies, a priest, a mathematician, and a calendar keeper. You're about to eavesdrop on one of the most quietly brilliant civilizations in human history. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where and when people are tuning in from. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The priest dips his hand into the water and points upward. His fingers move with quiet certainty as he traces an invisible shape in the sky, the outline of the planet Venus. Around him, other priests murmur. They're calculating something, dates perhaps, or divine cycles. And they're not using paper, not even a chalkboard, just memory, observation. Sky-math. The Maya weren't just skywatchers. They were obsessed with patterns in the stars, sun and moon. They charted eclipses and solstices with an accuracy that still humbles modern astronomers. With no metal tools, no telescopes, and no official math textbooks, they calculated the length of the solar year as 365.2420 days, almost exactly correct. And they did it centuries before the Gregorian calendar would exist to verify their math. But why? Why all this effort? Because to the Maya, numbers weren't just numbers, they were alive, sacred, each one connected to gods, animals, colors even, emotional moods. Imagine if your birthday number had its own personality, and your house address told you what kind of day you were going to have. It wasn't superstition to them, it was structure. There's a cheeky twist here too. Most of us learned about the end of the world in 2012, right? That Mayan calendar prophecy that had half the internet spiraling and the other half buying canned beans. Yeah, that was a cosmic misread. The Maya weren't predicting the apocalypse. They were just flipping to a new page in their cosmic diary. Kind of like saying, we've reached the end of this chapter, next stew. That global panic gave the Maya a brief PR revival, which is kind of funny considering how long they were ignored. For centuries, the Western world barely acknowledged that a Stone Age jungle civilization could outcalculate Europe. Historians still argue whether the Maya's obsession with the heavens was purely scientific or deeply spiritual. Likely, it was both. And when you look up into a black sky, filled with burning questions, don't you sometimes feel the same? Let's go back down to ground level. The jungle around you hums with night sounds, frogs clicking like wooden spoons, owls muttering from high branches. Somewhere, a jaguar sighs. In the distance, another pyramid peeks through the tree line. But beneath your feet lies something even more intriguing, an underground world. The Maya believed caves and cenotes, those deep sinkholes filled with water, were portals to the underworld. And sometimes, they placed observatories directly above them, as if the stars above and the depths below were part of the same equation. It's in this duality, light and dark, sun and shadow, numbers and myth, that Mayan math begins to take shape. It's not math the way you know it. No long division worksheets, no calculator apps, no groaning over algebra homework. Instead, numbers were danced, chanted, carved, and worn. Yes, worn on jewelry, in bead arrangements, etched into bone. Quirky detail. Mayan nobility often filed their teeth into sharp points and inlaid them with jade. Fashion, sure, but also, possibly, geometry. Their skulls were sometimes flattened from infancy into elongated forms, which makes you wonder, was this a cosmetic trend or a cultural diagram in bone? Historians can't agree, and neither can I, but you have to admit, it adds a certain mathematical flair to HEADWEAR. And speaking of heads, here's a curious truth. The Maya believed that certain individuals were born calendar keepers, gifted from birth with the ability to understand the sacred cycles. These weren't chosen by title, they were chosen by date. Your birthday literally decided your destiny. A little stressful? No. Let's pause here, with you sitting cross-legged in that jungle clearing, listening to the soft chants of a ceremony you don't quite understand. The stars overhead don't feel like distant objects anymore. They feel like notes on a page, like symbols in a code you're just starting to learn. Shells, dots, and bars etched in stone. Soon you'll know what they mean. The Mayan sky was never just decoration. It was a story, written in light, chapter by chapter, night by night. You're only just starting to read it. You kneel beside a flat, sun-warmed stone tablet, its surface engraved with clusters of dots, horizontal bars, and the occasional spiral seashell. At first glance, it looks decorative, maybe a game board, or a ceremonial carving. But then you realize it's math. Real, functioning math. This is the Mayan numeral system in action, and it's nothing short of ingenious. Your modern brain might twitch a little. You're used to a based-in system, 1 through 9, and then we reset. But the Maya, they operated on base 20, unique digits before looping. Why 20? Because they counted with fingers and toes. You'd think humans would have remembered they have 2 feet when designing number systems. But apparently, we got lazy somewhere north of the ankle. The Maya didn't. Here's how it worked. Numbers from 1 to 4 were represented by simple, single impressions. When they reached 5, they switched to a bar. A single horizontal bar equaled 5, 2 bars, 10. Then you add dots on top for the extra values. It's so visually intuitive, you could teach it to a toddler. Or, more accurately, a toddler could have invented it while stacking pebbles and drawing lines in the dirt. Then there's the real star of the show, the shell symbol. That's 0, a symbol for nothing, a placeholder, and not just a vague concept, but a fixed, essential part of their mathematics centuries before most of the rest of the world caught up. Europe was still flailing around with Roman numerals, which had no 0 at all. Go ahead, try doing algebra with a system that can't express the absence of value. You'll tear your hair out by equation 3. The Mayan 0 wasn't just an accident or an abstract theory. It was as visual as a pictograph, usually shown as a stylized shell, sometimes coiled, sometimes open. It represented the concept of nothing while still being something, and that little paradox tells you a lot about how the Maya viewed the world. Absence wasn't empty, it was potential, space that could be filled, time that hadn't arrived yet. Historians still argue whether the shell was inspired by actual conch shells, by the silence of a seed pod, or perhaps by a visual metaphor. After all, a shell contains something and nothing at once, and just maybe, the Maya understood that better than we do. Let's test your Mayan math skills. Say you want to write the number 13. Easy. 2 bars 10 plus 3 dots above them. Elegant. Now try 25. Here's where the vertical stacking comes. In Mayan, numbers weren't written in a line like ours, they were stacked vertically. Each horizontal level represented a power of 20. So the bottom level was units 1 to 19. The next level up was multiples of 20, 20, 40, 60, and so on. That means 25 would be 1 dot in the second level, representing 120 equals 20, and 1 bar with a dot 516 on the bottom level, totaling 26. Okay, close enough. We'll let you round down this time. The further you go, the more elegant it becomes. It's a system built not only for function but for symmetry and space. And it was used everywhere, on temples, altars, steely pottery, codices. If the Maya could write on it, you can bet they were carving numbers into it. Birth dates, death, days, ascension ceremonies, eclipse prophesial, marked by shells, bars, and dots. You can almost picture a young scribe, perched beside a flickering torch in a limestone chamber, practicing his glyphs in clay. His teacher, a grizzled old man with eyes like iguana scales, corrects him with a grunt. That's not a bar, that's a wiggly log. Start over. The quirk. Unlike most ancient civilizations, the Maya had more than one calendar, and each one required a slightly different counting system. There was the Tizocan, the 260-day sacred cycle used for divination. the Hob, a 365-day solar calendar, and then the long count, which tracked time in massive stretches like apocalypse levels of long numbers. The long count could reach into the billions, using a modified base 20 system that adjusted every few steps. Try fitting that into a pocket calculator. And they weren't just doing this for show. These calendars dictated when to plant corn, when to crown kings, when to sacrifice, and when to leave things well alone. It was a full cosmological spreadsheet, coded in base 20. So where did all this number mastery actually happen? Usually, in temples and observatories. Not the telescope kind, think, more like pyramid tops and carved sightlines that aligned with stars, solstices, or Venus rising. The Maya built their cities with math. Buildings weren't placed randomly. They were measured, counted, and aligned, with almost spooky precision. Temple staircases often had exactly 365 steps, one for each day of the solar year. Coincidence? Not likely. There's also evidence that math was gendered in some communities. Certain numbers were associated with feminine or masculine energies. Imagine being told your lucky number is 13. Because you were born under the moon god's favor, and then spending your whole life being a numerological overachiever. Kinda beats a boring zodiac reading. Want a more whimsical twist? Some scribes may have worn their favorite numbers as jewelry. A single jade bead equals 1. A carved bone strip equals 5. A bracelet made of 13 items. Suddenly, your wrist is a mathematical statement. Historians can't confirm this with total certainty, but depictions of high-ranking nobles often show number patterns in their accessories. Whether it was math, fashion, or spiritual coding is still debated. And then there's the whisper of oral math. Some believe number charts were used to memorize complex values. You'd learn rhythms, a bar, a dot, a shell maybe, even sung to the beat of a drum. There's no surviving recording of what this sounded like, of course, but you can imagine the cadence, a lullaby of logic, a song of numbers. So now, take one last look at the stone tablet in front of you. It's no longer a mystery. It's a language, a counting system made for fingers and stars, for gods and farmers. No rulers, no compasses, just the human mind, a few seashells, and a deep respect for the patterns that hold the universe together. You brush the dust off a carved glyph and suddenly see it clearly. That's not just math, that's memory. You wiggle your toes inside your sandals and glance down. 10 fingers, 10 toes, 20 perfect little number tools. You've probably used your hands to count before tapping fingers, to remember how many eggs are left in the fridge, or how many days till Friday. But you probably never used your toes, unless you were really desperate, or really good at yoga. The Maya, on the other hand, built an entire civilization on the assumption that your full body comes equipped with a complete base 20 calculator. And honestly, they might have been onto something. To them, counting didn't stop at the wrist. Let's rewind to the start. Imagine a group of early Maya sitting by a fire in a clearing. They're distributing maize kernels to share among families. One of them, maybe a matriarch or an elder, begins to count the kernels by touching each finger. Then, when she runs out of hands, she doesn't grab a stick or make a mark. She just shifts to her toes. That's not laziness. That's efficiency. Eventually, the habit becomes culture. Culture becomes tradition. Tradition becomes math. That's how the base 20 system, also called vigesimal, was born. And here's where it gets fun. Base 20 is not only intuitive if you're barefoot, it's also strangely elegant for higher level calculations. You get far more units before needing to escalate to the next place or column. The first digit handles 0 to 19, then 20s, 400s, 8000s, and so on. It scales quickly, but without chaos. Let's pause for a reality check. The number 400 in Mayan math had its own name Baktin. That's not just a number, it's a calendar epoch. One Baktin equals about 394 solar years. Suddenly, the same people who counted corn on their toes were using those same digits to count centuries and construct calendar cycles that stretch farther than most religions. If you're feeling a bit smug with your decimal system, don't be. Our beloved Bastin wasn't chosen for logic. It was chosen because we ran out of fingers. We never considered toes. That's the whole reason you're living your life, paying taxes, and checking your blood pressure in Bastin because of hand laziness. Let that sink in. Meanwhile, in the Maya world, the base 20 system appeared everywhere, in the layout of cities, in the steps of pyramids, even in ceremonial clothing. You're not just learning a math concept, you're stepping into a whole worldview. Now imagine a young Maya apprentice learning math in the royal court. His teacher kneels before a smooth slab of limestone and draws 4 dots, one above the other. 1, 2, 3, 4, he says, tapping each with a carved stick. Then he draws a bar underneath. 5. The student nods. Then the teacher points to his feet, bare and steady on the ground. Count again. This time, the student uses toes, 2, 6, 7, 8, all the way to 20. It's not a gimmick, it's practical. It's your body as your first calculator. Historians still argue whether the Maya developed base 20 entirely independently or inherited some early Mesoamerican variant from the Olmec or Zapotic cultures. But one thing is clear, no one else perfected it like they did. And let's not forget how this affected their writing too. Mayan glyphs, those intricate looping symbols carved into stone, were often bundled in sets that made sense only if you understood vigesimal counting. You can't read a date in a Mayan codex without knowing how many 20s you're looking at, and if you assume it's based in good luck, you might think someone ruled for 10 years, when in reality, it was 200. A big difference when you're planning royal anniversaries. This unique structure also bled into Mayan cosmology. They didn't just worship gods, they measured them. Certain deities were linked to specific numerical patterns. The moon goddess might show up in a number sequence related to 20-day cycles. Venus, the morning star, had her own math entirely. Rituals weren't simply performed on the full moon. They were mathematically timed down to precise calendar intervals. You didn't sacrifice a turkey because it was Thursday. You did it because the 13th day of the 4th cycle of the 5th Catan demanded it. Obviously. You see now why understanding toes was kind of a big deal. There's something beautifully circular about how the Maya saw the world. 20 digits on the human body, 20 days in their sacred month, 20 units in the lowest calendar tier. The cycles looped and spiraled, often tying mathematical time to physical form. Your body wasn't separate from the cosmic order, it was part of the equation. Literally. Want a quirky twist? There's some fringe speculation, though far from proven, that Mayan dancers used their steps to teach math. Ceremonial dances often followed tight patterns, repeating after 20 steps or using foot-tapping rhythms to mark calendar days. Maybe it was just art, maybe it was mnemonic, but imagine if your math class had been taught through interpretive dance. You might have actually remembered what a prime number is. There's also visual art to consider. Some murals show figures holding up both hands and one foot making the universal gesture for 15. It's goofy, sure, but it's also clever. You didn't need to memorize symbols. You were the symbol. Even today, base 20 shows up in some surprising places. The word cotovents in French, for instance, literally means 4 20s. That's how you say 80, a linguistic fossil of vigesimal counting, hiding in plain sight. Some indigenous languages in Central America still preserve base 20 numerals in everyday speech. The Maya might not rule anymore, but their math still echoes when someone says 20 and 10 instead of 30. Here's a thought. If we taught base 20 in schools today, how different would kids perceive time? Would weeks still be 7 days? Would a decade be a vicade? Would we divide pies into 20ths? Would people celebrate their 100th birthday as a full 5 20s? You can almost hear the party hats rustling. But perhaps most fascinating of all is how the Maya respected the concept of structure without rigidity. Their calendars adjusted for solar drift. Their glyphs flexed across dynasties. Even their base 20 math had flexibility in the long count, where the third place occasionally shifted to base 18. Wait, what? Yep, the third place in the long count was a deliberate exception, 18 times 20 instead of 2020. Why? Because 360 days fits more cleanly into the solar year. It's math with built-in nuance, like a code that adjusts itself while still staying consistent. That's not a flaw, that's refinement. So here you are again, looking down at your toes. Funny how they've always just been there, kind of stubby, always cold in the winter, easy to stub. But now, you see them a little differently, as ancient counting devices, as the reason why a jungle civilization could predict eclipses, build pyramids, and outcalculate colonial Europe, all because they counted on 20. The air smells like soot. Not just any smoke, this is the kind that clings to history, the heavy stink of inked bark paper curling in the fire. You're standing in the town square of Mani, deep in the Yucatan Peninsula, watching a Bishop Diego de Landa, to be precise order, one of the most tragic bonfires in human memory. Piles of Mayan codices, hand-painted, folded like accordions, flutter one last time before the flames consume them. Your heart sinks a little, because even though you've never read a single glyph, you already know something precious is being erased. But let's rewind before the sparks. You're inside a shadowed temple chamber, long before the Spanish arrived. A scribe sits hunched over a sheet of a matula type of smooth paper made from fig bark and lime. It's soft but durable, perfect for painting. He dips a thin reed brush into a pot of crushed cochineal, deep crimson pigment made from insect sand, begins to write. But he's not using letters or numbers in the way you know them. He's painting glyphs, hundreds of them, each one loaded with sound, meaning, and sometimes layers of mythology. These codices were books, yes, but not books in the European sense. They weren't bound spines with neat paragraphs. Instead, they were long strips of folded material, zigzagging, back and forth, designed to be opened in sequence like a storyboard. Think of them as scrolls with hinges. They could stretch across entire altars when unfurled. And what they contained? Well, everything. Astronomy tables, market ledgers, royal genealogies, prophecies, rituals, even jokes. They were encyclopedias of a civilization. Now, here's the chilling part. Only 4 of these original codices survived. That's not a metaphor. Not 4,000, not 400. 4. The Dresden Codex, Madrid Codex, Paris Codex, and the Group Codex, each named after the European city or institution that now houses them, thousands of miles from the people who created them. It's like preserving the last Beatles vinyls by locking them in a museum in Antarctica. Poetic, but painful. And the reason so few survived? Mostly fire. In 1562, Bishop Diego de Landa, in a righteous fury against idolatry, organized an auto de fe, a religious Inquisition-style public burning. He later wrote, with almost comical cluelessness, that the Mayan texts contained nothing in which there was not to be seen superstition and lies of the devil. The irony. De Landa also compiled one of the most detailed accounts of Mayan culture, their customs, and yes, even a crude alphabet key. So, he destroyed the source while preserving the summary. That's like tearing up Shakespeare and then handing someone your doodled version of Hamlet in stick figures. Historians still debate whether De Landa truly understood the damage he caused. Some believe he was just following orders. Others think he genuinely believed he was saving souls. Whatever his motivation, the result was the same: a nearly total erasure of an entire library system. Imagine if we lost every scientific journal, novel, and math textbook, and had to rebuild civilization from 4 coloring books. But the Maya were resilient. Even before European contact, they had developed multiple centers of record-keeping. Codices were often stored in sacred bundles or temple vaults. Only trained scribes called Aj-sib could write them. This wasn't a casual career path. It required years of training, memorization, and ritual discipline. You didn't just doodle a snake god because you felt inspired. Every brushstroke mattered. The wrong glyph could insult a deity or misrepresent a date, and no one wanted to be responsible for a cosmic accounting error. Scribes weren't just authors, they were mathematicians, priests, and sometimes elite advisors to kings. A scribe could calculate a calendar cycle, interpret an eclipse, or record an ancestor's rebirth into the spirit world on the same sitting. Multitasking, absolutely, under pressure, constantly. They even had specialized tools, pigment pots made from seashells, brushes carved from jaguar hairs, and color palettes sourced from everything from minerals to beetle wings. It's said that codices were read aloud during ceremonies. Picture it, a priest slowly unfolding a long document, reciting glyphs in a low chant, while dancers act out the symbols and musicians follow the rhythms of the calendar. These weren't silent books for quiet corners, they were living documents, meant to breathe. And yet, most of them vanished in a matter of hours. The Spaniards, horrified by what they saw as demonic art, took what they could and destroyed the rest. Even stone carvings weren't safe. Churches were built over sacred altars. Mayan temples were dismantled brick by brick to create colonial buildings, and while some glyphs remained Hefirest on jungle walls, many codices never had a chance. Here's a slightly absurd but true detail. In the 18th century, European collectors who stumbled upon surviving Mayan codozis often dismissed them as decorative cloth or weird souvenirs. Some were nearly cut up to make hats. Yes, hats. It wasn't until the 19th and 20th centuries that serious efforts began to decode them. Linguists, cryptographers, and archaeologists spent decades piecing together the glyph system, identifying numbers, syllables, dates, and events. Even now, the work isn't done. Every few years, a new stone tablet or fragment reshapes our understanding of what the Maya were trying to say. Historians still argue whether the surviving codices represent religious doctrine, practical instruction manuals, or symbolic art. The Dresden Codex, for instance, includes detailed astronomical charts and eclipse predictions, suggesting it was more like a NASA almanac than a spiritual text. The Madrid Codex, however, is filled with rituals and ceremonies, hinting at priestly use. And then there's the Graulier Codex, whose authenticity was doubted for years until finally validated by carbon dating. Even ancient books can have drama. You're probably wondering, how could so much knowledge be lost so easily? Well, most Mayan codices were written on organic materials, bark, paper, animal hide, or woven cloth. They weren't designed to last for centuries unless protected in ideal conditions. Combine that fragility with conquest, tropical climate, and deliberate destruction, and the odds weren't great. And yet, somehow, 4 survived. Let's linger on that. You're back in the jungle, peering into a dusty archive room of a long temple. A rolled-up codex sits undisturbed in the corner, wrapped in jaguar skin. You reach for it gently. What's inside? A list of kings, a corn planting calendar, a joke about the moon god's bad haircut. We'll never know. Or maybe we will, someday. Because hope isn't lost. Recent discoveries of mural fragments and stone inscriptions continue to provide context, and some modern Maya communities still preserve fragments of oral tradition, rhythms, patterns, and phrases that echo faintly from those long-lost codices. So, the next time you open a book or scroll through an e-book, pause to remember the painted pages that never made it, the ink that burned, the knowledge that flickered out, but also the resilience of memory, the stubbornness of culture, and the way stories find new voices. The Maya didn't disappear, and neither did their math. You run your hand along the wall of a silent ruin. No steel, no screws, not even a single nail, just stone. Heavy quarried blocks stacked with such precision they've stayed locked together for 1,000 years. How did they do it? How did the Maya build enormous cities, engineer temples, manage trade, create calendars, and track time across centuries, all without metal or the wheel? You might assume that without iron tools or wheeled carts, the Maya were somehow primitive, but within minutes of stepping into their world, that illusion falls apart, because what they lacked in industrial hardware, they made up for with mathematical sophistication that would make even your high school math teacher raise an eyebrow. Let's start with the obvious. No wheels. You may picture them dragging boulders with ropes or building ramps with sheer manpower. And you'd be right. The Maya had the concept of the wheels. More wheeled toys made from clay have been discovered, complete with spinning axles, but they never used it for transport. Why? Historians still argue. Some say the jungle terrain made wheeled transport impractical. Others blame the absence of draft animals like oxen or horses, which didn't exist in pre-Columbian Mesoamerica. After all, wheels are only efficient if something's pulling them. But here's the kicker. Despite not using wheels for building roads or carts, the Maya built sprawling cities with mathematically organized layouts. Straight causeways, sakbeb, or white roads ran between major temples. Some extended dozens of miles, linking entire cities across dense jungle. Built from crushed limestone and elevated above the wet forest floor, these roads required both engineering know-how and long-range planning. Try doing that with no trucks, no GPS, and no power tools. Better yet, try doing it with nothing but corn, obsidian, and genius. Then there's the metal situation. They had no bronze, no iron, no steel, just obsidian, volcanic glass, sharp enough to cut through skin like butter. Maya craftsmen used it for scalpels, scrapers, and even ritual tools. It couldn't bend or hammer like iron, but it didn't need to. In their hands, stone became surgical. So what did they do with this toolbox? They built not just temples and homes, but cityscapes aligned to mathematical principles. Many of their major buildings were positioned to mark solstices, or the movements of Venus and other celestial bodies. A single miscalculation could mean a pyramid failed to cast its intended shadow on the right day. No pressure, right? But here's where it gets even more fascinating. Without paper blueprints, the Maya still managed architectural uniformity across centuries. That suggests they relied on systems of ratios and mathematical memory. A master builder might have known by heart that for every 13 steps on a staircase, a certain rise in width must be maintained. The builders didn't need metal tools. They had geometry in their heads and limestone at their feet. And you can forget calculators. Their primary tools for math were their fingers, toes, memory, and visual systems like dots and bars carved into stone or painted on codices. Need to solve a problem involving trade routes, time, a ceremony, build a palace. You do the math. Literally. One of the more subtle things they mastered was modular design. Temples and plazas were often built to proportions that could be reused or scaled. 1 unit in a small temple might match 10 in a larger one. That's not a coincidence, it's evidence of a consistent mathematical language. Let's take a break for a strange but true quirk. Some scholars believe the Maya tracked celestial events so precisely that they built buildings as living calendars. For example, the famous El Castillo pyramid at Chichen Itza has 91 steps on each of its 4 sides, plus the top platform totaling 365 steps, 1 per day of the solar year. On equinoxes, the sun casts a shadow of a serpent down the staircase, as if the building itself is shedding its skin. That's not accidental architecture. That's mathematical theater. Still, we need to circle back to the question, how does all this function with no metallurgy? Part of the answer lies in their materials. Limestone, abundant in the region, was soft enough to carve, but strong enough to last. They used wooden tools, ropes, and human labor, all directed by careful calculation and social coordination. Cities, like Tikal and Palenque, weren't spontaneous, they were engineered across generations with logistical math as the foundation. And let's not forget the economy. Maya city-states weren't isolated. They traded obsidian, salt, cacao, jade, and feathers across vast distances. But again, no coins, no minted currency, just math. Cacao beans served as units of value, sometimes exchanged in bundles or sacks. To track these transactions, scribes used Baran.math, or even visual coding. You might see a picture of a man holding a rabbit and a bag of beans, and that was the record. Complex, yes, but also incredibly human. You didn't need coins if you had consensus and notation. Some market stalls may have operated on fixed values based on calendar cycles. Certain numbers were auspicious, others unlucky. You wouldn't sell your best parrot feathers on the 7th day of the 13th moon, obviously. That's just bad accounting. The Maya tracked it all in their heads and in ink, using the rhythms of the natural world to guide economic activity. Math wasn't just a tool, it was a spiritual contract. Let's imagine a day in the life. You're a stoneworker in the city of Copan. Your job is to lay the base for a new altar. You check the priest's calendar, glyphs for the ceremony, date it's exactly 260 days away. That's 1 full Sisokan cycle. You start marking stones, counting days backward. Every 7th stone gets a carved glyph. Every 13th gets a ceremonial notch. You use no rulers, just strings, knots, and shadows. By the end of the week, you've measured time into rock. Later, your child returns from school and shows you a clay tablet. It has a row of dots and a bar. That's 6, she says proudly. And that's 20. It's all your fingers and toes. You smile, give her a piece of roasted maize, and remind her to be careful with her toes there, her calculator. After all, we often assume that civilization needs metal and machines to flourish. But the Maya remind us that math alone, when practiced deeply, spiritually, and daily, can build wonders. Their cities still stand, their carvings still count, and their logic still hums through the jungle. No iron, no wheels, just numbers. You're standing in front of a silent stone pyramid, its edges sharp against the rising sun. You can feel the warmth crawling up the side of the structure, just as it has done every morning for over 1,000 years. It doesn't look like much more than an ancient ruin at first, just stone blocks stacked high. But wait, look again. The shadows are precise, the corners align with celestial points. On a certain day, at a certain time, this temple becomes something else entirely, a giant astronomical machine. This was not accidental. This was Maya engineering guided by the stars. You may have heard of the Maya calendar. Maybe you saw the panic in 2012 when people misunderstood it, thinking it predicted the end of the world. That's not what the Maya believed at all. What they believed in was cycles, incredibly detailed cycles of time based on careful observations of the sun, moon, Venus, Mars, eclipses, and more. And they didn't just record this information on bark paper or carve it into stele. They built it into their temples. Let's start with El Castillo, the temple of Kukulkan at Chichen Itza, which you may remember from the previous section. That temple is famous for a reason. Every year, during the spring and autumn equinoxes, something extraordinary happens. As the sun rises and sets, the shadows of the stepped terraces fall in just the right way to create the illusion of a serpent slithering down the side of the pyramid. This serpent lines up with a massive stone snake head at the base. The illusion only lasts for a short time, and only on these 2 days of the year. The temple was not just a temple, it was a calendar in stone, a theatrical show designed by architects who understood solar geometry as well as any modern physicist. That's just one example. Now imagine dozens, hundreds of structures across the Maya world, each with similar alignments. Some temples pointed directly toward the sunrise on the winter solstice, while others framed Venus on the morning it first rose after a long disappearance. The Maya tracked Venus with intense precision. It was one of their most sacred celestial bodies. In fact, entire wars were sometimes planned to begin on the day Venus reappeared in the sky, as they believed it was a harbinger of change or violence. How could they do this without telescopes, without metal, without the concept of infinity? Simple. They watched the skies every single night. The Maya built observatories. One of the most famous is the Caracol, also at Chichen Itza. From the outside, it looks like a round stone tower, but inside, there are narrow slits and windows that align perfectly with the positions of celestial bodies at specific times of the year. When Venus appeared, or when the moon reached a certain phase, the light would pierce through in just the right way. You didn't need a telescope if your building was the telescope. They also had tools, nothing like sextants or modern charts, but mathematical systems and physical guides. They would use fixed horizon markers, chords, shadows, and a deep understanding of mathematical cycles. One such cycle was the Tizocan, a 260-day sacred calendar. Another was the Hob, a 365-day solar calendar. They also tracked something called the calendar round, a repeating cycle of 52 Hob years, where combinations of Tizocan and Hob dates would eventually repeat. Just like how your birthday and a weekday line up only every few years. But the real heavyweight of their calendar system was the long count. This system tracked vast stretches of time, reaching back to mythological events and stretching forward thousands of years. Dates in the long count are written as 5-part numbers, each representing cycles of different lengths, like the Maya equivalent of centuries, decades, and years, only even more complex. The famous date 13.0.0.0.0 corresponds to the end of one long count cycle, which fell on December 21, 2012, in the Gregorian calendar. This was not the end of the world. It was the end of a chapter, like flipping to the next page in a cosmic book. Now, imagine designing temples with that system in mind. Imagine building a ceremonial plaza where light hits a central altar only, once every 52 years. Imagine tracking the eclipse cycles, known as the serocycle, with such accuracy that you could predict when the next eclipse would occur even though you had no written physics, no computer models. The Maya could. They did it with observation, patience, and generation after generation of knowledge passed through the stars. And the purpose? This wasn't idle astronomy. It was deeply religious, social, and political. Maya rulers aligned themselves with celestial cycles. A king might schedule his accession ceremony to coincide with a solar zenith, the day the sun stood directly overhead, because it would signal divine favor. He might build a temple so that light shone through a doorway. On the anniversary of a war victory, he might engrave dates of eclipses on monuments, showing that he understood the workings of heaven and was therefore a rightful ruler of earth. The connection between sky and throne was fundamental. In fact, there's strong evidence that whole cities were mapped out according to astronomical principles. Some researchers believed cities like Tikal-Copan and Uzmal were laid out based on the orientation of key stars and planets. Their roads weren't always practical. They weren't always the shortest route from A to B, but they often lined up with sunrises, solstices, or celestial risings. This tells us something profound, that for the Maya, the sky wasn't just above them. It was within the very blueprint of their civilization. Take Copan, for example. Several of its steely tall stone monuments are aligned in such a way that their shadows interact during solstices. When you stand between them on the right day, the light seems to fall in perfect lines across glyphs depicting rulers and gods. This isn't coincidence. This is sky-powered storytelling. Let's not forget the role of priests and astronomer scribes, who were elite members of society. These were the people responsible for keeping the calendars, making predictions, and advising rulers. They were both scientists and spiritual leaders, guardians of time, keepers of the heavens. They carried enormous cultural weight. Without them, society risked falling out of harmony with the stars. Even death was tied to the cosmos. Maya tombs were sometimes aligned with Venus risings or eclipse events. Grave goods were inscribed with star dates, and some pyramids may have even acted as star maps, guiding the souls of the dead toward celestial rebirth. All of this alignment, every shadow, every carved date, was part of a philosophy of balance. The Maya believed that human life had to stay in sync with the cosmos, or chaos would creep in. The sun had to rise on time. The gods had to be fed. Time had to be measured, counted, and honored. And so, they did what most modern civilizations never even attempt. They built their timekeeping into stone, visible to all, lasting for centuries. You could call them architects. You could call them astronomers. But perhaps the best word is cosmic engineers. Their temples didn't just touch the sky. They understood it. You are not a king. You are not a priest. You don't live in a stone palace or climb pyramids to talk to the gods. You are someone else. Entirely, you are one of the thousands, maybe tens of thousands, who make Maya civilization actually work. You are the hands that build, the backs that bend, the voices that barter, and the feet that walk the dirt roads each day. You are the ones history often forgets, and yet, you are the Maya. Let's step away from the grand temples and royal courts for a moment. Let's walk into the fields and kitchens, the markets and workshops, where real daily life unfolded for the majority of the Maya population. Because while kings built temples and scribes wrote history, it was the ordinary people, cooks, potters, weavers, carpenters, builders, and hunters who sustained this ancient world. Your day begins before the sun rises. The birds haven't even started chirping. There's no alarm clock, but your body knows. You wake up on a mat made of woven palm, in a home made of wooden posts, clay walls, and a thatched roof. It's one room, maybe two if you're lucky. There's a fire pit in the center. Smoke from last night's cooking still hangs in the air. Your family is still sleeping, bundled on mats, and your task begins quietly. Start the fire again. You begin by blowing softly on last night's embers, feeding it with bits of dry wood and bark. Slowly, flames lick up. You grind maize on a stone, metate back and forth, until the grains become dough. This will become tortillas, the heart of every meal. Maize isn't just food, it's sacred. The Maya believed humans were made from maize. It's your past, your present, and your future. Your kitchen is not filled with metal pots or cast iron pans. You cook using clay pots, balancing them on stones over the open fire. You might stew beans, squash, or chili peppers. Meat is a luxury most days. It's vegetables, with maybe a bit of turkey, fish, or iguana if it's a feast day or a special catch. After breakfast, it's time for work. If you're a farmer, you head to the fields, milpas as they're called. Maya farming isn't done with plows or animals. You clear fields using stone axes and fire, and you plant using wooden digging sticks. Maize grows here, alongside beans and squash, the three sisters of Mesoamerican agriculture. These crops support one another. Beans climb maize stalks, squash shades the soil, and all three replenish the land. You don't own this land. It's held communally, managed by the local authorities or town council. You farm it not for profit, but for survival and tribute. A portion of your crops will go to the local elite as tax or tribute. Some will be traded. The rest feeds your family. You hope the rains come at the right time. You hope no pests arrive. You hope the gods are kind, because if they're not, your children go hungry. If you're not a farmer, maybe you're a craftsperson. Let's say you're a potter. Your hands are stained with red and white clay. You work under a lean-to next to your house, spinning pots on a slow turntable. Each pot you make is different, some for cooking, some for storage, others for ritual. You decorate them with paint made from crushed minerals and plant dyes. Maybe you carve glyphs or animal designs. If you're skilled enough, a noble might commission you. If not, you sell your work at the local market, trading for salt, honey, or woven cloth. Or perhaps you're a weaver. You spin cotton thread, using a backstrap loom that's strapped around your waist and attached to a tree, with dyed threads. Reds from cochineal insects, blues from indigo. You create intricate patterns. Each village has its own style. A trained eye can tell where a woman is from just by the design on her hupil, her tunic. Clothing is not just functional, it's identity. If you're a stonemason or carpenter, you might be working on a building project for the local ruler or temple. You don't use iron tools, none exist, but your stone blades are sharp enough. You quarry limestone, carve blocks, and fit them together without mortar. You climb scaffolds with baskets of plaster. You carve sacred images onto walls. This is hard work, dangerous work, but honorable. Let's not forget the hunters and fishermen. In a forest thick with jaguar and deer, hunting is both risky and rewarding. Hunters use spears, blowguns, or traps. They know the jungle like you know your own hands. Fishermen in coastal towns cast nets or trapped fish with woven baskets. They bring in shellfish, turtles, and sea snails, all vital protein for people inland. And then there's the market, a vibrant hub of daily life. Every few days, the plaza fills with sellers and buyers. You walk among them, smelling roasted cacao, fresh tamales, and fermenting maize beer called chicha. People shout in different dialects, trading obsidian blades for salt, feathers for honey, clay pots for cotton tunics. No coins, no paper money. The Maya operate on barter and value of use. Women are not idle in this world. They grind maize, raise children, weave, cook, clean, and trade. Some are healers, trained in herbs and rituals. Some are midwives, bringing life into the world. A few are even scribes or priestesses, especially in elite families. Children work, too. From a young age, they carry water in clay jugs, help in the fields, gather firewood, or watch their siblings. By the time they are 12, they are skilled workers in their own right. And what about religion? That's part of your daily rhythm too. You don't just visit the temple for grand festivals. You make daily offerings, a bit of food, a burning incense stick, a whispered prayer. You believe that everything you do affects the gods, and they in turn affect your crops, your health, your future. You might participate in a small village ceremony, where elders chant and burn copal resin, or you might travel for a grand festival, watching priests wear jaguar skins and spill sacred blood to honor the deities. Your life is hard, but not hopeless. It's full of meaning. You belong to something bigger than yourself, a village, a lineage, a calendar, a cosmos. You have stories, songs, and jokes. You laugh at night over a fire, sharing food with neighbors. You mourn when someone dies, holding ceremonies to guide their soul into the afterlife. And when that day comes for you, when your time ends, your family will bury you under the floor of your home. They'll leave offerings, a few pots, a maize cob, a carved shell. They'll mark the grave with flowers or feathers. Your body returns to the earth, feeding the maize that fed you your whole life. And so the cycle continues. History books often focus on kings and battles, but civilizations are not made by kings. They're made by people like you, people whose names were never carved in stone, but whose hands built every temple, cooked every meal, and planted every seed. You didn't rule the Maya world, but without you, it would have never existed. You're not a doctor in the modern sense. You don't wear a white coat or carry a stethoscope, but you are something older, something woven into the very heart of Maya life, a healer. You might be called an amen, a doer, someone who does things that others cannot. You're respected, sometimes feared, always needed, because in this world, surrounded by jungle and spirits and invisible forces, your knowledge is power. Your hands don't just heal bodies, they protect souls. You live in a small home, like most others, but yours smells different. The scent of copal incense, crushed herbs, and burning wood lingers in the air. Hanging from the rafters are bundles of dried leaves, twisted roots, colorful flowers, and even animal bones. You don't hoard them randomly. Every item has a name, a purpose. a place in your invisible toolkit. You learned these from your teacher, and they learned from theirs. Your knowledge is oral, passed down like precious fire from mouth to ear across generations. Your day begins not with a prescription pad, but with observation. You listen, you watch, you ask careful questions. A mother brings her sick child. His stomach hurts, he's pale. Maybe worms, you think, maybe something more. You examine him, not just with your hands, but with your spirit sense. You believe that illness has two faces, the physical and the spiritual. Sometimes it's bad food, other times it's bad energy, a curse, a breach in ritual, a forgotten offering, so you respond with both medicine and meaning. You go into the jungle, you walk barefoot, guided by memory and instinct. The Maya know over 500 medicinal plants. You know where they grow. You know when to pick them. Some must be harvested only under the full moon. Others must be spoken to before cutting. You whisper, a chant, as you slice the root of the chaka tree, known for its power to reduce fevers. You gather guava leaves for diarrhea, bitter orange for high blood pressure, jackass bitters to fight infections. You crush aloe, wrap it in cloth, and apply it to burns. Your garden at home is an extension of your wisdom. You grow anise for digestion, oregano for colds, chaya for blood health, and cilantro to purify the body. You prepare them as teas, pastes, steams, or doses. Sometimes, you mix herbs into cacao or maize gruel to make it easier to consume. But healing isn't just biology, it's ritual. When a patient believes they've been cursed, you prepare for a spiritual cleansing. You burn, copal draw sigils on the floor with cornmeal, and chant in the old tongue. You pass an egg over their body, absorbing negative energy. You may use a live chicken or bundle of herbs to draw sickness out. Once complete, the objects are buried or burned, taking the illness away. And there are the hallucinogenic rituals, used sparingly and with great reverence. You know how to prepare morning glory seeds for visions. You understand the effects of psychoactive mushrooms, of tobacco so strong it induces trance, of balch, a fermented drink made from tree bark and honey that loosens the tongue of spirits. These aren't party drugs. These are sacred keys, used in ceremonies to communicate with the divine, to diagnose spiritual ailments, or to guide the dying. Speaking of death, your role doesn't end when a patient dies. You help prepare the body. You know which herbs preserve it, which chants calm the soul. You perform post-mortem rites to prevent the spirit from becoming lost or vengeful. The Maya believe that souls journey through a complex afterlife, and your prayers light the way. You are not alone in your work. Every village has its midwives, who chant during birth and rub protective herbs on newborns. There are bone setters, snakebite experts, and apothecaries who memorize plant recipes like poetry. Some of them specialize in treating animal bites, insect stings, or broken bones using splints made from bark and sap. But not everyone respects your work. Some people fear it. When a child dies suddenly, or crops fail, or someone falls mysteriously ill, suspicion arises. Was it the gods, or was it witchcraft? Healers are often blamed, especially if they fail. You're one ceremony away from being celebrated as a wise elder, or condemned as a sorcerer. So you walk carefully between worlds, the world of plants and the world of people. Still, many come to you, even the elite, even priests, because your methods work. You don't just treat symptoms, you understand the whole person and the whole cosmos that touches them. And more importantly, you know something that modern medicine is just beginning to rediscover, that healing isn't just about the body, it's about connection. Connection to the earth, which gives you your herbs. Connection to the ancestors, who whispered knowledge in dreams. Connection to the gods, who must be appeased. And connection to your patient, whose story is your greatest clue. Imagine you're treating a wound. You don't just clean it with a mix of crushed chili and lime, painful, yes, but antiseptic. You also pray over it. You might blow sacred smoke. Across it, you might leave a flower near the bed to attract good spirits, because wounds aren't just flesh, they're stories. Every cut and ache has meaning in the Maya worldview. Even mental illness isn't ignored. A man who hears voices isn't dismissed. He might be considered touched by the gods, or haunted by guilt. You might prescribe silence, isolation, dream herbs, or a ritual journey to a sacred cave. You understand that what happens in the mind is often a reflection of the soul's imbalance. And caves, yes, caves are important. You might lead a patient, deep into a limestone cavern, a place where the earth opens to the underworld. Here, in the belly of the earth, you perform soul retrieval ceremonies, asking the gods to return what illness has taken. You offer jade, feathers, even blood. The patient might fast, chant, or undergo a vision quest to find healing. You're not doing this for gold. You are paid in food, cloth, or thanks. Some people leave you turkey eggs, others bring a gourd of honey. What you do can't be priced, because you hold something no one else holds. The memory of the forest, even when Spanish conquistadors arrive. Centuries later, with their iron tools and Christian prayers, they are amazed at your skill. They write of Maya healers with admiration and fear. Some of your methods are adopted, others are destroyed. But in secret, in silence, the traditions continue. Mothers pass knowledge to daughters. Healers hide their bundles in the rafters. The jungle remembers. And even today, in remote villages, among the trees and stone ruins, your descendants still walk the forest paths, gathering leaves and whispering prayers. You are a healer. You know the names of roots that can cool the blood, and leaves that can silence pain. You speak the language of plants and they speak back. You wake up with the sunrise. But not just because the light touches your face, it's because today is Ike, a sacred wind day. That means it's a good day to begin new things, to speak with clarity, to ask for guidance. You didn't guess that. You didn't check the weather. You consulted the calendar, the heartbeat of Maya life. You're not just living in a jungle. You're living in a web of time, meticulously measured and deeply revered. The Maya didn't simply mark time. They worshipped it, calculated it, and spoke to it. Time wasn't a straight line. It was a sacred rhythm, a dance of cycles. And at the center of this dance were the calendars, plural, because no one calendar could contain the full truth. First, there is the It's a 260-day sacred calendar, and it guides rituals, names, ceremonies, and destinies. This calendar is made up of 20-day names and 13 numbers. Like gears, they rotate together. Every day has a unique combination, 1 imix, 2 ik, 3 ik, and so on, until the full 260 combinations play out. Then it begins again. You might not realize it, but your birthday on the Tizocan defines you. If you're born on 7 Ben, you're a reed, flexible, strong, and connected to leadership. If you're born on 12 Cain, you're linked to wealth, to maize, to seeds. These signs are not predictions, they're reflections of who you are, what you're here to learn, and what powers you carry. Then there is the Hob, the solar calendar. It's made up of 18 months, each 20 days long, plus 5 extra nameless days called Wayib. These are ominous days. Days when the boundaries between worlds grow thin. You don't start journeys on Wayib. You don't light fires unless necessary. You stay quiet, respectful. Some families perform protective rituals, because bad things are known to happen during these liminal days. The Tisocan and Hob are often used together in what's called the calendar round, a 52 cycle. When you combine a 260-day calendar and a 365-day one, it takes 52 years before the same date combination repeats. That's not just coincidence, it's sacred. Every 52 years is like a cosmic reset, a full breath taken by the gods. Entire ceremonies are planned around it, but the Maya weren't satisfied with just measuring human time. They reached further into cosmic time. For that, they used the long count. Imagine a calendar that begins on the creation of the current world, not metaphorically, but literally. The long count marks time from a starting point the Maya believed was August 11th, 3114 BCE in the Gregorian calendar. That's when this era began. You live in the fourth world, and the long count tracks its days like an odometer counting miles. The long count uses a vigesimal-based Wendy system, except for one quirk, where the second place the ton rolls over after 18 instead of 20, to sync with the 360-day year. A typical long count date looks like this: 13.0.0.0.0.0. That S, not a serial number, it's a cosmic timestamp. Each unit has a name. Kin equals 1 day, Winal equals 20 days, Ton equals 360 days, Keaton equals 7,200 days, Bacton equals 144,000 days. So when you see 13.0.0.0.0, that means 13 Bactons, or 1,872,000 days, since the beginning of the current world. That date, December 21st, 2012, the end of a full long count cycle. People in the modern world panicked about doomsday. You wouldn't have prepared offerings, you would have lit candles, you would have acknowledged the end of one great cycle and the beginning of another. Every major event, coronations, wars, temple dedications, was marked with long count dates. These weren't footnotes, they were cosmic alignments. To do something important, you had to know what the sky was saying, what the numbers whispered, how the gods were watching. And this wasn't guesswork. You studied for years to become an AJKIJ, a keeper of days. These were Maya time priests, astronomers, diviners, historians, all in one. You learned to read codices, those bark paper books filled with glyphs, numbers, star charts, and eclipse warnings. You learned to observe the zenith passage of the sun, when it cast no shadow, a rare and important event in the tropics. You marked the equinoxes, solstices, and Venus cycles. Yes, Venus. To the Maya, Venus wasn't just a morning star. It was a god, a warrior, a harbinger of change. You tracked its synodic cycle 584 days, with astonishing precision. Many wars were launched only when Venus rose as the morning star. The calendar told you not just when to act, but when to wait. Time wasn't neutral. Time had personality. Some days were aggressive, some were fertile, some were sacred. You wouldn't plant maize just because the weather was nice. You'd wait for a day when the gods smiled on agriculture. You wouldn't get married on just any day. You'd ask the calendar first. In this way, the Maya synchronized human action with divine rhythm. Even architecture was guided by the calendar. Temples and pyramids were aligned with celestial events. At Chichen Itza, during the equinox, a shadow serpent slithers down the stairs of El Castillo. That's not coincidence. That's calendar math carved in stone. In Copan, Tikal, and Palenque, inscriptions detail births, deaths, and prophecies, using calendar glyphs as if time itself was the true ruler. You might wonder, how did the Maya keep track so well without clocks or computers? The answer is observation and devotion. Every sunrise, every moon phase, every solar zenith, they were logged, watched, memorized, passed on. Timekeeping was an act of worship. You don't let the sacred rhythm go out of tune. Even today, in parts of Guatemala and Chiapas, the tizocan is still used. Daykeepers still chant the names of the days. They still perform ceremonies for Hpu, the sun, or Bots, the thread of creation. The knowledge survived colonization, hidden in mountains and whispered in kitchens. It's not dead, it's breathing. You are a child of the calendar. It knows you. It names you. It weaves your life into a fabric of meaning far larger than yourself. When you are born, the calendar speaks. When you die, the calendar sings. You don't count hours. You count energies. You count cycles. You count stars. You are never lost. You are always exactly where you're supposed to be, because the calendar has already walked this path long before you took your first step. You hear the first cracks, not in the walls of your city, but in the silence of the priests. They whisper more than they chant now. Ceremonies still happen, but with less certainty. The maize still grows, but thinner, weaker, slower. The rains don't come like they used to, and when they do, they come all at once, flooding the fields. Instead of feeding them, you're not just living through a drought, you're living through a turning of the world. This is the collapse, though no one calls it that yet. No one ever does when it's happening. You still wake up, gather firewood, speak to your gods, and go to the market. You still believe in the power of the calendar and the promise of the ancestors. But something is different. The temples aren't. Rising the kings are arguing. The people are leaving. Your city is not alone. Across the Maya lowlands, great urban centers like Copan, Tikal, Palenque, and Calakmul, the signs multiply. Construction halts. Hieroglyphs stop mid-sentence. Ball courts lie abandoned. What was once a dense network of powerful kingdoms becomes a patchwork of empty plazas and silent stones. By the end of the 9th century, the classic Maya world is in retreat. But this collapse isn't an apocalypse. It's not the end of everything. It's the rearrangement of a civilization, the breaking of one pattern so another can emerge. And to understand it, you must look beyond a single answer. There was no one cause. Instead, a perfect storm. Start with the environment. The Maya built their cities in rainforest, lush but fragile. They cleared land for farming, stripped hillsides for limestone, and drained wetlands to expand agriculture. It was brilliant, and it worked, until it didn't. Over centuries, deforestation and soil exhaustion made the land vulnerable. Then came droughts, severe and prolonged. Tree rings and lake sediments tell the story. Decades of less rain. For a maize-based people, drought isn't just inconvenient, it's existential. But nature alone didn't destroy the cities. Humans played their part. As kings competed for power, they demanded more tribute, more labor, more wars. The monuments tell of endless battles, dynastic feuds, and shifting alliances. City-states like Dos Pilas and Naranjo locked into spirals of warfare. Farmers had to fight instead of plant. Fields were burned. Trade routes crumbled. Add to this the strain of inequality. While elite palaces grew taller and tombs more elaborate, common people bore the burden. They built the temples. They carried the stones. They offered the maize. And when the rains failed and the kings kept asking, many simply walked away. Whole regions saw voluntary depopulation, not death, but migration. People moved north, west, anywhere they could live with less pressure. Religion too was shaken. Kings were not just rulers, they were divine mediators. Their power depended on their ability to intercede with the gods. When the rituals no longer brought rain, when crops still failed, despite sacrifices, faith faltered. Some cities turned on their elites. Statues were defaced. Thrones toppled. In other places, the people quietly left, taking their gods with them but leaving their temples behind. It's tempting to think everything ended, but that's not true. You must understand this clearly. The Maya did not disappear. While the great southern cities collapsed, new centers rose in the northern Yucatan. Places like Uxmalsail, Caba, and eventually the mighty Chichen Itza flourished during the Terminal Classic and Post-Classic periods. These cities experimented with new styles, both in architecture and power. The focus shifted from god-kings to councils, merchants, and military orders. In Chichen Itza you see influence from the Toltecs, a central Mexican culture. Feathered serpents wind across temples. Warriors march in columns. The Great Bolcourt, the largest in Mesoamerica, stands as a monument not just to sport, but to ritual warfare and sacrifice. This was a new Maya world, less divine, more pragmatic, but still deeply spiritual. Throughout the post-classic, Maya culture continued to evolve. Mayapan became a powerful capital. Maritime trade exploded, with coastal towns like Tulum and Xcaret acting as hubs of commerce. The Maya built canoes capable of long sea voyages, trading salt, cacao, obsidian, and cotton up and down the coast. Their writing system remained in use. Their calendars continued. Their gods still received offerings. And then came the Spanish. When the Spanish arrived in the early 16th century, they didn't discover a lost civilization. They found thriving Maya cities, living traditions, and organized resistance. The conquest was not swift. It took nearly 2 centuries to fully subjugate the Maya. And even then, rebellions continued. From the highlands of Guatemala to the forests of Piton, the Maya fought, hid, resisted, and endured. Spanish missionaries burned the codices, seeing them as pagan. Only for survived Dresden, Madrid, Paris, and Grolier. But they whisper still of stars, gods, and sacred days. The invaders tried to erase the language, but they failed. They tried to ban the rituals, but the fire never truly went out. You walk today through the ruins, and you might feel silence. But the Maya are not gone. They are millions strong, living in Guatemala, Mexico, Belize, Honduras, and El Salvador. They still speak Quechua, Mam, and dozens of other Maya languages. They still honor the Tizocan calendar. They still climb mountains to make offerings. They still remember Dot. In towns like Chichicastenango, highland shamans burn incense and chant prayers that echo their ancestors' voices. In Zainacantan, the patterns of traditional textiles mirror ancient glyphs. In Merida, Yucatec Maya guides lead you through old temples with new pride. Even Maya hip-hop artists today weave ancestral rhythm into modern beats. The collapse didn't end the Maya. It simply shifted their story. And what about the stones, the great temples, the broken cities? They became witnesses. The jungle took them back, vine by vine. For centuries, they slept under moss and root, but they were never truly silent. Farmers knew where the stones were. Local stories kept the names alive. Over there, they said, is where the old kings built. Over there is where the sky spoke. In the 19th and 20th centuries, explorers, archaeologists, and looters came. Some with reverence, some with greed. They uncovered pyramids, read glyphs, mapped cities. Slowly, the Maya voice began to rise again. Decipherment of the script in the late 20th century brought a flood of new understanding. The Maya were no longer a mystery. They were authors of their own story, speaking across time in glyph and stone. Now you know better. You don't ask, why did the Maya vanish? You ask, how did they survive so much? You don't see a ruin, you see a city paused. You see a temple still listening. You see a people not gone but waiting for you to hear them. You may think the Maya are a memory, a lost people locked in stone and jungle, but that's only because you haven't looked closely enough. The Maya are not lost, they are not extinct, they are not ruins, they are alive, and they are all around you. You begin your morning in the highlands of Guatemala, perhaps in a village near Lake Atitlan. The sun rises slowly over volcanic peaks, the mist swirling round the hills. A woman in a hand-woven hoopil, embroidered with brilliant zigzag designs, walks to market with her child. The fabric she wears isn't just decoration, it tells the story of her town, her ancestors, her lineage. In this village alone, everyone speaks Cachical Maya, not Spanish. And when they greet each other, it's not with hola, but with Rutzal Awach. Is your face well? The Maya world today stretches across 5 countries: Guatemala, Mexico, especially the Yucatan Peninsula, and Chiapas, Belize, Honduras, and El Salvador. Across this region live more than 6 million Maya people, speaking over 30 different Maya languages. These are not dialects. These are fully developed, complex languages, like Quechua, Quechua, Tzotzil, Yucatec, Maya, Mam, Ixil, Itza, and many others, each with its own history, rhythm, and song. In the bustling markets of Chichicastenango, the air is thick with the smell of burning copal incense and ripe papayas. Men in traditional woven pants and straw hats trade goods, beside elders who still offer ritual prayers to the mountain spirits. They don't need tourists to keep their traditions alive. They do it because it is life. The Maya calendar, including the Tizocan and the Hob, continues to guide ceremonial dates and farming cycles. Maya priests, known as a JQIJAB, still track the days, make offerings, and light sacred fires. But Maya survival is not just about holding on to the past, it is also about adapting, resisting, and evolving. In the city of San Cristobal de las Casas, in Chiapas, Mexico, Maya youth gather in community centers to learn both Tezoltl Maya and digital filmmaking. In Quetzaltenango, Maya students fight for the right to receive their public education in their native languages. In Belize, Yucatec Maya leaders organize ecotourism projects that blend environmental protection with cultural preservation. You see grandmothers weaving textiles the way they were taught by their own grandmothers, but also teenagers rapping in Maya hip-hop, mixing ancient rhythms with modern protest. And there is still much to protest. The Maya people today face profound social, political, and economic inequalities. In Guatemala, despite making up a majority of the population, Maya communities are often excluded from power, denied land rights, and marginalized in national narratives. Access to healthcare, education, and justice remains uneven. Discrimination is common. Maya speakers are mocked in cities. Traditional dress can be seen as backward, and many are pressured to assimilate. Yet, instead of vanishing, the Maya resist. They rise. One of the most powerful examples of Maya resistance in modern times came during the brutal Guatemalan Civil War, 1960 to 1996. In this 36-year conflict, hundreds of thousands of Maya civilians were caught in the crossfire and often targeted directly. The military government, in its fight against leftist guerrillas, launched what came to be known as a genocidal campaign against Maya communities. Entire villages were massacred. Cultural leaders were assassinated. Traditional practices were criminalized. The army saw Maya identities as subversive, as dangerous. The worst of it came during the early 1980s. Under dictator Efrain Rios Montang, over 200,000 people died in the conflict. The majority of them indigenous Maya. But from this horror came a deeper determination. Survivors began to organize. Women formed human rights groups. Exiled Maya leaders spoke at the United Nations. Academics, shamans, weavers, and musicians all worked together to preserve and rebuild what the war had tried to destroy. In the 1990s and early 2000s, efforts to revitalize the Maya languages and cultural systems gained momentum. Bilingual education programs were established in Guatemala, with varying degrees of success. Universities began offering degrees in Maya studies. Grassroots language revival movements surged. Some communities now create Maya language radio stations, broadcasting everything from weather reports to resistance poetry in their native tongues. Others host community ceremonies, not just to honor ancestors, but to reclaim identity, to declare, "We are still here." In the town of San Juan La Laguna, for example, the local Maya Tizutagil population voted to require all public signage to be written first in Tizutagil, before Spanish or English. It's a small act, but a powerful one. It says, "This is not a tourist village. This is our land, our voice, our culture, and culture, for the Maya, is not just heritage. It is a living expression." Consider the textile arts, passed down from generation to generation, but never static. Each community has distinct motifs, some echoing birds, others mountains or constellations. But these designs are not frozen in time. Today's weavers blend tradition with innovation, incorporating new colors, experimenting with sustainable dyes, even adding protest slogans to their work. The same is true in spiritual life. Maya ceremonies continue to be held at ancient sites like Eximj, Kumarkaj, and Uzmal, sometimes quietly, sometimes in defiance of state bans. The Day of the Dead, or Katbal, is not a Catholic holiday for the Maya. It is a moment when ancestors walk with the living. They prepare food for the dead, offer candles, and burn palm incense at the same altars where their ancestors prayed 1,000 years ago. Meanwhile, younger Maya generations are engaging the digital world in powerful new ways. On Instagram, Maya artists share intricate beadwork and tattoos inspired by glyphs. On YouTube, Maya chefs cook ancestral recipes and explain their roots. On TikTok, teenagers teach short Maya language lessons or share jokes that only fellow Keish speakers will understand. In the classroom, Maya anthropologists are no longer just subjects of study. They are leading the research. They are unearthing bones, decoding glyphs, rewriting the colonial narratives that have long silenced them. In politics too, the Maya voice is growing stronger. Rigoberta Menchú, a Keish Maya woman, won the Nobel Peace Prize in 1992 for her advocacy of indigenous rights and justice. Her autobiography brought global attention to the suffering of her people, but also their dignity. In recent years, Maya candidates have run for office, pushing agendas that center indigenous education, land reform, and environmental justice. It is not easy. Corruption, racism, and repression persist. Mining companies continue to extract from Maya land without consent. Multinational corporations displace villages for hydroelectric dams. Some Maya languages are still slipping toward endangerment. Elders die, and with them go songs and words and ways of being that the world may never hear again. But still, the fire burns. Because Maya identity is not a relic, it is a continuum. From the builders of Tikal to the poets of Quetzal, from the astronomers of Copan to the digital archivists of Merida, the Maya story has never truly paused. It whispers in prayers, it dances in looms, it shouts in protest, it sings in code. And now you know, the Maya are not gone. They are your neighbors, they are your teachers, they are your history and your future. Time, for the Maya, was never just a ticking clock or a row of boxes on a wall. It was sacred, it was alive. And unlike the linear calendars of the modern world, a straight road from past to future, Maya time was a great circle, a breath, a heartbeat, a cycle that spun through creation and destruction, life and death, day and night. To understand the Maya worldview, you must first understand their obsession and brilliance. With Timekeeping, Dota begins with the Tizocan, a 260-day ritual calendar that guided religious life. Each of its days was a unique combination of one of 20-day names, like Ika wind or Can seed, and one of 13 numbers. The result, a repeating cycle where every day had a name, a number, and a spiritual identity. No 2 days were the same. No 2 people were born under the same sky, with the same fate. You were born, perhaps, on Atajor, the day of the Sun Lord. That says something deep about your nature, your destiny, your energy. Maya priests, or Aquajeb, would read your day sign and offer guidance, even rituals, to harmonize your path. The Tizocan calendar was used for naming children, planting crops, timing battles, and conducting ceremonies. It was the pulse of daily Maya spiritual life. Then comes the Hob, a 365-day solar calendar. This was the civic calendar used for marking the agricultural seasons, scheduling festivals, and organizing the rhythm of public life. It consisted of 18 months of 20 days each, 360 days, plus a 5-day period at the end called Waib, a dangerous liminal time when the world was said to hang loosely in space, vulnerable to chaos and spirits. Now here's where the Maya showed staggering ingenuity. They didn't just use two separate calendars, they interlocked them. The Tizocan and Hob calendars rotated like gears in a cosmic machine, forming a 52-year cycle called the calendar round. A full round, when the same Tizocan and Hob date repeated, took 18,980 days. That's right, a calendar so complex that a particular day wouldn't repeat for over 5 decades. But even the calendar round wasn't enough. The Maya went bigger, much bigger. They created the long count, a calendar designed to track not just lifetimes, not just dynasties, but entire epochs of human and cosmic history. The long count begins at a mythical creation date, August 11th, 3114 BCE, in our modern Gregorian calendar. That's the moment, the Maya believed, when this current world, the fourth sun, the fourth creation, came into being. The long count works in base a vigesimal system and uses units like kinde, winal, 20 days, ton, 360 days, keaton, 7,200 days, and boktin, 144,000 days. The Maya carved these counts into stone, into temple staircases and city gates. A famous example is the Stela Sea at Quirigua, which records the 0 date, the literal beginning of Maya time as we know it. So when you see a long count date like 13.0.0.0.0, that's not random. That represents 13 bucktons, or about 5,125 years, the full cycle from the beginning of time to December 21st, 2012 CE. Yes, that 2012. Much was made of the Maya calendar ending in 2012. Books claimed it was a prophecy. Films imagined planetary destruction. Survivalists packed their bunkers. But the truth is, the Maya never said the world would end. They said the Boktan would end. A great cycle would complete, and another would begin. To the Maya, this was not cause for panic. It was sacred transition, renewal. Just as night follows day and winter follows summer, time would simply shift into a new layer. Inscriptions from sites like Tortuguero and Palenque even speak of future events, scheduled for thousands of years ahead. One tablet at Palenque mentions the dedication of a future temple on a date over 4,000 years in the future. That's not the world view of a people who feared the end. It's the perspective of a civilization deeply in tune with long, spiraling patterns of time. So how did they build such calendars without telescopes, computers, or calculators? They watched, and they recorded everything. The Maya were among the greatest skywatchers the world has ever known. They charted the movements of Venus, which they associated with war and sacrifice. They tracked lunar eclipses with extraordinary precision. They understood the solar year, the equinoxes, the solstices, and the synodic cycles of planets. Some scholars argue that the Maya calculated the length of the lunar month to within seconds of modern measurements. Many Maya cities were aligned with astronomical events. At Chichén Itzá, the temple of Kukulkan was designed so that on the spring and autumn equinoxes, sunlight would create the illusion of a serpent slithering down the staircase. At Kopon, stelae were placed to mark solar zeniths. At Uxmal, doorways faced the rising of Venus. This was architecture, as cosmology. They did not see time as neutral or meaningless. For the Maya, each moment had power, personality, consequence. A day was not just a slot in a schedule. It was a living entity, with needs and energy. That's why ceremonies were held to honor time itself. Offerings of corn, jade cacao, and blood were given to the daylords to ensure harmony in the cosmic order. This sacred view of time continues today. In modern Keish villages, daykeepers still rise before dawn to burn offerings and chant prayers over the 260-day calendar. They don't just keep the calendar, they live by it. Farmers plant when the days say to couples marry on auspicious signs. Illness is treated through calendar analysis. Life moves in cycles, not straight lines. And that worldview, cyclical, sacred, astronomical, stands in sharp contrast to the linear time of Western society. In the modern world, time is money, time is a race. We are told to beat the clock, to save time, to not waste it. But for the Maya, time is not the enemy. It is the universe speaking, and perhaps most incredibly all of this, the Tzolk'in, the hob, the long count, was not just used by a few elite priests. It was carved in stone, taught to children, woven into textiles, encoded in myths. It was lived. Even in war and drought and collapse, the calendar endured. It connected generations. It made sense of the stars, of birth and death, of gods and crops. You may carry a phone in your pocket that tells you the date. The Maya carried entire cosmologies of time in their hearts and temples. So the next time you glance at your calendar, stop. Remember that time is not just hours and deadlines. It is cycles and stories. It is stars and shadows. It is memory. And in the Maya world, it is sacred. In the world of the ancient Maya, the relationship between humans and gods was not merely symbolic or abstract. It was reciprocal, urgent, and often visceral. The gods gave life, water, maize, time itself, and in return, they expected something sacred, something powerful, something living. That offering, more often than not, was blood. To the Maya, the universe was not a fixed or guaranteed structure. It was sustained by ritual. Without ritual, the sun might not rise, the rains might fail, crops might wither, chaos could return. So every prayer, every dance, every offering was part of an ongoing bargain with the divine. And at the heart of that bargain was sacrifice. Sacrifice, to the Maya, was not cruelty. It was necessity. It was sacred math, a balancing of debts. The gods had sacrificed themselves in the act of creation. The maize god had died and been reborn to give food. The hero twins had descended into the underworld to trick death and rise again. Even the gods had bled. So humans must bleed in return. But sacrifice took many forms, some symbolic, some theatrical, and others brutally literal. Let's begin with the most frequent, auto-sacrifice, or bloodletting. This was the practice of elites, kings, queens, priests, piercing their own bodies in sacred ceremony. A king might draw a stingray's spine through his tongue or genitals, collecting the blood on strips of bark paper. That blood would then be burned in bowls as an offering, with the rising smoke believed to open doorways to the gods. This was not performance for the crowd. It was deep spiritual devotion. Blood was seen as the essence of life, shula, the soul force, and offering it voluntarily was a form of communication, sacrifice, and cosmic renewal. One of the most striking depictions of this practice comes from Yaxtlan, a Maya city in modern-day Chiapas, Mexico. On lintel 24, Queen Lady Zook is shown pulling a spiked rope through her tongue, kneeling in reverence while her husband, Shield Jaguar, holds a torch. The scene is intimate, sacred, and powerful, a royal act of cosmic duty. These rituals were not occasional, they were calendar-bound and tied to astronomical events, royal anniversaries, and dynastic transitions. Bloodletting was also a form of divination. The visions that came through pain and trance were interpreted as messages from ancestors or gods. But while bloodletting was common, it was not the only ritual offering. The Maya also sacrificed animals, especially birds, deer, dogs, and jaguars. These offerings were sometimes placed on altars, buried beneath temples, or burned with incense. Parrot feathers, shells, and copal resin were also used as sacred materials. And then, the most solemn and momentous of times, came the offering of human life. Human sacrifice among the Maya was rarer than among the later Aztecs, but it did occur, and when it did, it was drenched in meaning. Those chosen for sacrifice were often war captives, prisoners of status, taken alive in battle and paraded through Maya cities as trophies. Sacrificing a noble enemy was the ultimate show of power, not just military might, but religious dominance. By offering a royal bloodline to the gods, a king demonstrated divine favor. The methods of sacrifice varied. At some sites, captives were beheaded, often during rituals honoring the hero twins or underworld deities. Decapitation was symbolic, representing the cycle of death and regeneration. At Chichen Itza, heads may have been displayed on Tezonpantli skull racks, to show the reach of divine justice. Another form of sacrifice was heart extraction, typically reserved for large public rituals. A victim would be laid on a stone altar, and a priest would cut into the chest, pull pulling out the heart and offering it to the gods, a direct gift of the life force, the beating shula. There's also evidence for drowning sacrifices, especially at sacred cenotes, natural sinkholes believed to be portals to the underworld. Xibalba. At Chichen Itza, the sacred cenote yielded human remains, jewelry, and artifacts, indicating that both people and treasures were thrown into the water as offerings. Some victims were likely young women or children, chosen for their purity or connection to rain deities, but not all sacrifice was death. There were also symbolic deaths, ritual reenactments of myth, where participants would take on divine roles, die in the story, and return as heroes or gods reborn. These performances were not mere theater. They were living myth played out to ensure the continued spinning of the cosmic order. One key part of these performances was the ballgame pits, in the Maya language. This wasn't just sport, it was sacred ritual. Players used their hips to keep a heavy rubber ball in play, often reenacting mythic battles between life and death. In some interpretations, the losing team, or more often, specific captives, were sacrificed at the game's end. Though this is still debated, the ball court itself was a liminal space, neither earth nor sky, neither life nor death, where gods were believed to intervene directly. The court at Copan, Monte Alban, and Chichen Itza were all constructed with powerful astronomical alignments. Every bounce of the ball was an echo of the celestial spheres, so when we speak of Maya sacrifice, we are not speaking of random violence or bloodlust. We are speaking of a theological system where sacrifice was currency, communication, and creation. Sacrifice was also deeply political. Kings proved their legitimacy through blood, their own and others. Major events like the dedication of temples, accession to the throne, or end of a calendar cycle all required ritual offerings. Without them, the cosmic order could fray. Crops might fail. Enemies might prevail. This fusion of power, politics, and ritual can be seen at cities like Tikal and Kopin, where monuments depict kings piercing themselves, dancing, in costume, offering captives, and invoking gods with smoke and blood. Every stela and temple staircase was a ritual script, a cosmic ledger of debts paid. Even the architecture of Maya cities reflected sacrificial themes. Temples were often built atop earlier ones, symbolizing layers of death and rebirth. Burials of kings were accompanied by sacrificial offerings, sometimes even humans, who would accompany the ruler into the afterlife. Offerings were buried beneath each construction phase: obsidian, jade, stingray, spines, and animal bones. These were not foundations of stone alone. They were spiritual anchors. So how did the people respond to this culture of sacrifice? There's evidence that rituals were deeply participatory. Public plazas were filled with incense, music, chanting, and the scent of copal resin. Offerings were not done in secret. They were part of public life, public duty. The people witnessed, believed, and often contributed. Ritual was not just the king's burden, it was the community's bridge to the divine. And the gods, in turn, were not cruel tyrants. They were relatives, protectors, participants in the drama of life. They needed care, remembrance, and payment. This was a moral system, harsh, yes, but not senseless. Today, in modern Maya communities, echoes of this sacrificial tradition remain in the form of copal offerings, ritual dances, chicken sacrifices, and the burning of candles and maize in sacred caves. The understanding of time, debt, and divine reciprocity continues, not through blood, but through devotion. And the end, Maya sacrifice was about balance between worlds, between life and death, between gods and humans. It was a language of flame, blood, and smoke, a contract constantly renewed, a system simultaneously brutal and beautiful, that allowed an entire civilization to feel not alone in the universe, but heard. There is a silence in the Maya world, a silence that echoes louder than the drums and chants that once filled the jungle. Great cities with towering pyramids, bustling marketplaces, and sacred ball courts were one day quiet. The jungle crept in, roofs collapsed, trees split stone, and the people who had once carved time into stone were simply gone from the heart of their civilization. This was not a sudden apocalypse. There were no comet strikes or plagues from the sky. What happened to the classic Maya is a story of slow unraveling, a complex blend of environment, politics, warfare, and human choices played out over a couple of centuries. but to the modern eye, it still feels like a mystery. Let's start by understanding the scale of the decline. Between roughly 750 and 950 CE, dozens of major city-states in the central lowlands, places like Tikal, Köpen, Calakmul, Karakol, and Palenque, began to show signs of trouble. Monument carving stopped. Stele with kingly inscriptions vanished. Cities that had once built temples every few decades halted construction. Ballcourts went unused. Trade routes dwindled. And then, gradually, those cities were abandoned. Not all Maya cities collapsed, far from it. In the northern Yucatan, cities like Uxmal, Chichén Itzá, and Mayopan rose to prominence after the lowlands' decline. And in the highlands of modern-day Guatemala, cities like Cumacaj continued to thrive into the post-classic. But the loss of the great classic centers left a mark that archaeologists and historians have spent more than a century trying to explain. So what went wrong? The first thing we must confront is that there was no single cause. The Maya collapse is not a tale of one disaster, but of many converging pressures that eventually snapped the fabric of society. Let's begin with environmental stress, particularly climate change. Sediment cores from lakes in the region, especially Lake Chichincanab, show a dramatic pattern, a series of severe droughts, some lasting decades. During the critical period of the 800s and 900s, the classic Maya depended on consistent rainfall. There were no rivers in the central lowlands, only seasonal lakes and man-made reservoirs. Agriculture, drinking water, and even rituals depended on rain. Without it, maize crops would fail, reservoirs would dry, famine would stalk the fields, and with famine came social unrest. But drought alone doesn't cause a civilization to collapse. Societies can adapt. What made the Maya vulnerable was the way their entire economic and political system was structured. The Maya elite relied on hierarchical kingship, known as the divine kings, or Keowal Ajawab, to mediate between humans and gods. These kings maintained power through monumental construction, successful warfare, and the staging of grand rituals that often required tribute from peasants and vassals. In times of plenty, that system worked. But as drought weakened crops and water sources, the peasants had less to give. Temples stopped being built. Kings could no longer perform rituals with the same splendor. The spiritual and economic bargain began to fray. And when kings could not fulfill their role as divine intermediaries, their legitimacy crumbled. This led to another major factor: political fragmentation and warfare. Evidence shows that the late classic period was one of escalating conflict. Cities that had long been rivals like Tikal and Calakmul, or Dos Pilas and its neighbors, entered into prolonged wars, some of them lasting generations. Fortifications increased. Royal inscriptions became more militaristic. In some areas, entire dynasties were wiped out. These wars weren't always for territory. They were often about prestige, captives, and ritual power. But during periods of drought and social strain, warfare became more destructive. City after city was drawn into a cycle of vengeance, tribute, and collapse. Meanwhile, the burden on the average Maya farmer grew unbearable. The ruling elite demanded tribute and labor for temples and palaces, even as families struggled to feed themselves. The people began to leave, not in panic, but in quiet disillusionment. There were no uprisings, no torched cities, just gradual abandonment. Fields went untended, roads grew silent. The jungle began to reclaim its space. Some cities tried to adapt. There's evidence of short-lived reformations, rulers taking on new titles, reducing monument production, or simplifying rituals. But these changes came too late. The system itself, deeply rooted in divine kingship, elite privilege, and unsustainable growth, could not bend far enough. Another issue was urban overreach. Cities like Tikal and Karakol had populations in the tens of thousands. The surrounding forests were cleared for farmland and fuel. Over time, deforestation led to soil erosion. Combined with drought, this left many regions ecologically fragile. When stress hit, there were no reserves to fall back on. Still, there is an important distinction to make here. The Maya did not vanish. The people themselves survived. They migrated. They adapted. Many moved northward or into the highlands, joining growing centers like Chichén Itzá or Uxmal. Others returned to simpler village life, away from the rigid hierarchies of the old cities, and some remained in smaller settlements near the ruins of the great capitals. preserving traditions, languages, and rituals. Even today, millions of Maya people still live across Mexico, Guatemala, Belize, Honduras, and El Salvador. They speak more than 24 Maya languages. They perform rituals to the rain god Choc, honor maize with ceremony, and consult daykeepers of the sacred calendar. So the collapse of the classic Maya was not the end of a people, it was the end of a system, a political model, a form of divine kingship, a ritual and urban architecture that had reached its limits. In fact, some scholars now compare the collapse to the fall of Rome, not a sudden cataclysm, but a slow decay of central power, with new forms emerging in the wake. The shift from the classic to the post-classic Maya world involved change, not erasure. Yet even today, standing before the silent pyramids of Copan, Yaxchilan, or Tikal, it's hard not to feel a shiver. What was once sacred ground now sleeps beneath moss and roots. The cities were not destroyed by outsiders. They fell from within, from stress, conflict, drought, and perhaps a loss of faith in the very ideas that had built them. The mystery of the Maya collapse endures because it is not just a question of history, it is a question of sustainability, of what happens when civilizations grow too big, too rigid, or too far from the resources that sustain them. It asks, how much can we take from the land before it takes us back? And perhaps more hauntingly, what do we do when the gods stop answering? In the silence that followed the Maya decline, new stories began to emerge. Pilgrims came to the ruins and made offerings at old temples. New powers rose in the Yucatan. New forms of worship took root, and the Maya calendar continued to turn, not in stone this time, but in memory, tradition, and breath. So the collapse of the classic Maya was not an extinction, it was a transformation, one written not only in ruins, but in the living hearts of their descendants. You might imagine that when the classic cities of the Maya were swallowed by the jungle, the culture, the people, and the ancient wisdom were lost forever. But that's not how history works. Civilizations may change, kingdoms may crumble, monuments may fall, but people, and especially cultures like the Maya, endure in ways both visible and invisible. You can't bury 3,000 years of tradition under stone and vines. It breathes in language, belief, daily routine, and even in resistance. So let's move past the image of lost cities and vanished peoples, because the Maya are very much alive. Millions of them dot today, across Mexico, Guatemala, Belize, Honduras, and El Salvador. Over 6 million people identify as Maya. They live in villages, towns, and cities. They speak more than 30 living Maya languages, among them Quechua, Yucatec Tezotl, Kachikal, and Mopan. Some are farmers, some are artists, some are teachers, lawyers, politicians. Some live in communities that still carry echoes of pre-Columbian ways of life. Others balance tradition with modernity, but all are part of a living culture, not a fossilized one. The survival of Maya culture is, in itself, a quiet miracle. Think of what they've endured. The collapse of classic centers, the rise of new kingdoms, the arrival of Spanish conquistadors, the forced conversions of Catholic missionaries, colonial rule, forced labor, land dispossession, revolutions, civil wars, and systemic racism. Through all this, Maya people preserved identity through language, stories, rituals, and an unbreakable bond with the land. Let's begin with language, perhaps the strongest strand of continuity. When you hear a mother in the Guatemalan highlands speaking Quechua to her child, you're not just hearing words, you're hearing echoes of the same syllables that once called out to the maize god in Copan. You're hearing the same rhythm that shaped the poetry of the Popol Vuh, the creation story passed down for generations. Maya languages carry not just meaning, but worldviews, different ways of seeing nature, time, direction, and community. In many villages, children grow up bilingual, speaking both their indigenous language and Spanish or English. But the roots run deep in their first tongue. Ritual also endures, both in private and public spaces. In Chichicastenango, Guatemala, you can witness modern Maya people praying at the steps of a Catholic church, burning incense and copal, offering flowers, whispering petitions to ancestors and gods. This blending of Catholic and Maya beliefs is not confusion, it is adaptation, it is resilience. The old gods were never erased, they were woven into the new framework. Every year, communities across the Maya region celebrate seasonal festivals, rooted in agricultural cycles, Ceremonies honor rain, corn, sun and earth, often presided over by AJQ, IJ or daykeepers, who still consult the 260-day Dizokan calendar for divination, guidance, and healing. These sacred specialists are trained from a young age. They carry bundles of candles, copal seeds, and sometimes even obsidian blades, tools of a spiritual lineage that predates Christianity by over 1,000 years. You might expect that the Spanish conquest in the 1500s would have erased all this, and indeed, it tried. The invaders burned Maya codices, destroyed temples, banned native practices, and forced mass conversions. In 1562, the Bishop Diego de Landa ordered the destruction of Maya books in Mahani, Yucatan, calling them works of the devil. Of the hundreds of folded screen books once written by Maya scribes, only four survive today, fragments of a vast literary heritage. And yet, Maya people hid their knowledge. They kept stories alive by telling them in secret. They adapted prayers into Catholic forms. They encoded wisdom in embroidery, weaving, pottery, and oral poetry. In short, they survived by going underground. This survival became even more remarkable in the modern era, especially during the brutal years of the Guatemalan Civil War, 1960 to 1996. During this conflict, the Maya population suffered immensely. The army often viewed indigenous communities as sympathetic to leftist rebels, leading to massacres, torture, and displacement. The worst years were in the early 1980s, under dictator Efraín Ríos Montt, when entire Maya villages were destroyed in what many international observers now call genocide. Over 200,000 people died, the vast majority of them Maya. But even in the face of such horror, the culture persisted. Elders taught children the language in whispers. Rituals continued at night, in secret. Migrants carried their traditions with them into exile. And after the war, the Maya emerged once again, not just as survivors, but as activists, poets, artists, and teachers, demanding recognition. Today, there are Maya politicians in national assemblies. Maya filmmakers tell their stories on international screens. Maya weavers sell their works globally. And Maya youth, connected to smartphones and the internet, remix their identity through music, fashion, memes, and education, bridging old and new with extraordinary creativity. But this story is not just about survival. It is also about reclamation. In recent decades, there's been a growing movement among Maya communities to revive lost knowledge, reclaim sacred sites, and redefine identity on their own terms. In Guatemala, institutions like the Academia de Lenguas Mayas work to preserve and teach native languages. In Mexico, Maya scholars research their own history using both archaeology and oral tradition. Pilgrimages return to old temples, not as tourists, but as descendants. In places like Izamal, Tulum, and Uxmal, new generations perform ceremonies where their ancestors once did, not for show, but for continuity. In Belize, you'll meet Quechua farmers who still plant by the moon phases. In Chiapas, you'll find Zapatista Maya communities building autonomous schools, clinics, and councils guided by indigenous principles. In the US and Canada, Maya immigrants form diaspora groups to keep their traditions alive abroad. And in cyberspace, young Maya content creators share language lessons, cooking tutorials, ancestral stories, and even humor in Cachical or Yucatec on TikTok and YouTube. Perhaps most surprisingly, the ancient Maya calendar, once dismissed as arcane, has found new resonance. In 2012, there was international panic and fascination over the supposed Maya apocalypse. Most of it was nonsense, of course based on a misreading of the long count calendar. But for many Maya people, 2012 was not the end. It was a new beginning, the start of a new Bacton cycle, a chance to renew, to remember. So here we are, in a century shaped by globalization, technology, and rapid change. And yet, the Maya, this ancient civilization once feared to be lost, continues, not frozen in time, but alive in the faces of children, in the voice of elders, in the scent of copal, in the turning of calendars, and in the sound of laughter echoing across highland fields. When you see a woven hoopel rich with sacred geometry, when you hear a prayer whispered to the maize god, when you eat tamales during a harvest celebration, you're not witnessing a relic, you're witnessing resilience. The Maya world didn't disappear, it evolved, it resisted, it remembered, and now it speaks, not through stele, but through people. And maybe that's the greatest legacy of all. So now, as you lie still, eyes soft and mind adrift, let the story of the Maya gently settle around you like mist curling through the jungle trees. You've walked alongside time itself tonight, through centuries of stone cities and sacred calendars, of kings and scribes and silent stargazers, all reaching for something beyond, a kind of harmony between earth and sky. And though the temples may crumble and the codices may fade, the essence remains, in language still spoken, in rituals still offered, in seeds still planted. Season after season, the Maya never vanished. They endured, quietly, stubbornly, beautifully. You've listened to stories of collapse, of struggle, of rediscovery, and in all of them there was rhythm, a cycle, not a straight line, but a spiral. Just like their calendar, just like time. So breathe, now, deep and easy. Imagine the stars above the rainforest, where an ancient priest once counted them with care. Imagine the flickering firelight in a village clearing, the drumbeat soft and steady, the smell of maize roasting on stone, and feel how small and safe and ancient the world becomes when we listen like this, not to conquer history, but to lie beside it, to be cradled by it. You are part of this great rhythm too, a pulse that beats across millennia, a story that whispers across languages, a night sky shared by kings and farmers, scribes and dreamers. And you sleep now, knowing that the past is not gone. It is here with you, wrapped in story and silence. Let it lull you gently, let it carry you home. Good night.